Hi, everybody, and welcome to a new edition of Newsmakers. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, November 8th, post-election. We're going to talk about all the local election stuff and state election stuff, and then have a brief period of commentary about what happened nationally. And I am joined by our all-star panel of top local journalists, Gwyn Lurie, editor-in-chief of the Montecito Journal and CEO of the ever-expanding Montecito Media LLC, Josh Molina of Newshawk and CEO of the ever-expanding Santa Barbara Talks podcast, and Nick Welsh, who is never expanding, but always winning.
Another CEO.
But what'd you have? Three in a row on columnist of the year? Can you tell I'm not bitter about that? Because I stopped bringing up all the time. All right, before we jump into election stuff, I want to talk about the situation, Henry, in Montecito with the Miramar Resort and the plan by Uber LA developer Rick Caruso to plop in a big shopping mall, which Josh keeps referring to as a housing project. In any case, the big opposition, or the most visible opposition, Gwyn, was at All Saints Church, concerned with the epistemological question of their views. And apparently that's been resolved and all is good, huh? What's the latest?
Well, there is no latest. It went before the County Planning Commission. They approved it, and there surprisingly have been no appeals yet.
So no appeals to the Board of Supervisors?
Correct.
So
Unless it is appealed, it's done.
why does that surprise you? Did you not feel that Caruso's great compromise was enough?
Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, I think even though there are people other than the church itself and church congregants, sorry, I'm going to put do not disturb on this, who, neighbors who take issue. But I really think the engine behind the protest of this was the church. And I think when the church settled, it kind of fell off. Like even money that was being given by some community members went through the church for the church to lead this. So when that went away, there was no structure in place to sort of protest. The other thing is that, this community has a lot of, not everyone in this community doesn't like it. There are people here who do. As you know, since COVID, like a quarter of the community turned over. There are a lot of people, from Los Angeles and other places who shop in Rick Caruso's beautiful shopping malls all the time, so for them to have the convenience of having these fancy stores and all that seems okay. I think.
But weren't there like traffic issues and parking issues and stuff as well that didn't really get addressed?
Well, part of the problem with Prop 330 is that it really undercut this smaller community's ability to really explore all these things fully. I think Caruso took some of it upon himself, but of course, these studies are always biased, so it's going to be explored from his vantage point. But the thing that really I didn't understand in the end, because I attended part of the County Planning Commission meeting, was when the board was questioning the county transportation department via Zoom. And they were talking about the traffic studies they had done. They're like, well, we applied the same regulations across the board in the county. So we applied what we would apply, for example, to San Roque to Montecito. Like it's all this kind of uniformed regulations that are being applied and standards.
There's more of a wildfire issue, for example, with the roads in Montecito. No,
I just think every community, every area, the Mesa has a different issues than San Roque, and then has different issues than Montecito. Montecito, obviously, in the last 6 years, lost 23 community members to a tragic urban wildland interface event that that affected this community the way it did because of the topography and geography of this community. So, and geology of this community. So I think to not look specifically at this community and how it's going to impact traffic was something I would have questioned regardless of how I felt about Caruso's plan. So
Josh, are your sources also telling you there's not going to be any appeal to the soups?
Well, there could be an appeal. I think it would have to come really quickly. There are, here's the deal: is that Caruso is so powerful and has such a high-powered staff and legal team that once they cut
salads.
Exactly. And once they cut the deal with the church, it was sort of, well, if the church, which is the biggest institutional opposition, is willing to go for this, that leaves a lot of the neighbors, the residents. And although there's this perception that, everyone in Montecito is a billionaire, these neighbors, the ones who oppose it, they're not interested in getting into a financial battle with Caruso, because that will just end up badly in court for them. Now, the unions are the carpenters union. They're the ones who would appeal if they choose to on the last day, because they want local workers to be part of this project. And so that was what came up at the meeting, and they spoke and they testified. I do want to say one thing, which is I don't cover the Montecito Planning Commission, and I sometimes cover the Board of Supervisors. And as somebody who covers the Santa Barbara City Council for decades, I was kind of stunned at John Park, Planning Commissioner, and the wheeling and dealing that he was doing behind the scenes to broker a deal. It's something that
Planning Commissioner John Park,
Santa Barbara, County Planning Commissioner. He was taking great pride in meeting with the neighbors, meeting with the church, meeting with Caruso, talking about, oh, we can do this, and let's lower the second floor, let's set it back, and this will work.
It's not even his district.
And he lives, I think, in the San Ynez Valley. But the point is, like, these neighbors are expecting to go into a hearing with knowledgeable members, but not necessarily members who are looking to work out a deal behind the scenes for their own political purposes. I mean, I sat through 20 minutes of John Park talking about how he grew up in Montecito, how he swam out there onto the raft, how he knows the community as well as anyone. And he made it so much about himself that it was a bit nauseating, at least for the reporter. I mean, these are long meetings. These meetings last Friday. They go on forever. And here he is taking up this very, really valuable time. I don't know if he wants to run for 3rd District Supervisor when Joan Hartman decides not to run, but it felt very politically self-motivated and interested that he was doing all of this. That said, people like Paige Robinson, some of the neighbors, they're not happy with the church. They feel betrayed by the church. And, I think if they had the money to appeal, they would. Caruso is slick, polished, just incredible, charismatic, charming.
And you don't want to play poker with him.
Lisa Plowman's on his side. The staff is on his side. It's tough to go up against him.
So, I didn't watch. What did John Parks do behind the scenes? What would not have happened had he not been maneuvering?
Well, the church opposed it because the second story was going to block their view. Right. And so church Park suggested that they shave off some of the square footage on the second floor so that it would leave a view of the mountains from their mausoleum, and they would still be able to see it. And he met with Caruso, he met with the neighbors, he met with the church, and he sort of worked behind the scenes to cut this deal, which that just to me is not his role. The role of these commissioners is to go into a meeting and make the best objective decision based off the evidence for all included. But you have a conflict of interest when you're working behind the scenes to reach resolution.
Well, and even if you might like the role that John Park played more than you like the role that Sandy Stahl played, because she more was like working with the opposition, I still think it's the same thing. It's like if you're going to take issue with her not being an objective commissioner who's going to hear the details and make a judgment, then you have to hold John Park to the same standard. So that to me is bizarre.
Yeah, and well, Nick, you can get deeper in the weeds on inside baseball than anyone, not to mix a metaphor. What is John Park up to? Because I've heard from other county sources on other housing stuff. He's always kind of meddling around and everything. Is he
I
got
think,
signs, as Josh says, on that supervisor seat, or?
you know, I've known John for a while, and on the planning commission, uh, his attitude is, my job isn't to be here just to rubber stamp what staff says. I'm a planning commissioner, and I am going to exercise my discretionary authority as I see fit. And he is by far the most willing to challenge staff, the most willing to sort of ask a bunch of questions that seem a bit out of line. He challenges the assumptions behind things. He has great confidence in his own creative judgment and his own ability to wield the sword like Solomon. And if there's nobody up there doing it, he's going to fill that vacuum. So when people speculate that he might be thinking about running, I think he's about the same age as Joan Hartman, and I think he's quite happy. I haven't asked him, are you thinking about running? I personally, based on no real knowledge, but some familiarity, I say I don't see him running for office or that being it. It's
Well, there's another smart guy on the planning commission, which was Mike Cooney, but
he was not there. He was on vacation.
He wasn't able to make it, or he
No,
wasn't
he was been on
there?
vacation.
Oh, okay. All right.
Let me just give one example on Park, and I'm going to just kind of put a different frame on Nick's interpretation of him. At least at this meeting, he was coming across almost like a bully. There was a guy from the union who spoke, and he said that he would like the meeting continued. And he said, we need to discuss these issues. What's the rush? We want to be included in this conversation for local work to build the housing and luxury retail shops. And Park, so here's a guy, public comment, and Park looks at him and says, interrupts him. You're not supposed to have a debate, by the way, with the public commenters. And he says, normally when people ask for a continuance, they give you a date. What date do you want this to be continued to? And the guy responded instantly, which, is your next regular meeting. But, it's out of line to be putting the public on the spot, or when you want to calendar a public meeting. That's not their job. It's the staff's job. And he was so defensive that it just came across as though he was on the side of his victory, not necessarily what everyone thought was best. Sorry.
Well, you go ahead, Gwyn. I'll jump in after you.
Well, I just didn't want to just skip over that Mike Cooney was on vacation point, because that to me was also just weird. Like, you take it away from the Montecito Planning Commission. Some might argue they didn't do the best with their moment, but in any case, they weren't in a deciding position, right? And you give it to the Planning Commission, which has one Montecito member, and you hold the conversation when he's on vacation. Like that.
Well, this is all about getting the thing before DOS is gone, is it not?
But it's not.
Isn't that the sort of underlying
maybe, but that's not right
here?
either. Look, I have nothing against Caruso.
I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that's what it is.
It might well be, but I'm saying then that was a pretty good game of chess that was played there. But it's still in the end, like, even for Caruso's sake, if this were to be appealed to the Board of Supervisors, I think it should be voted on by Roy Lee. And by the way, I've not even talked to Roy Lee about how he feels about this. I don't even know how he'd vote. And granted, he might not want his first vote to be so controversial, but look, this is something that is going to impact this community for decades to come, and certainly is going to be something he's managing from a traffic perspective, from a construction perspective, from an other fallout, environmental perspective. He's going to be handling this. So he should vote on this. Should not be a lame duck vote, in my very strong opinion, even for Caruso's sake. I think Caruso needs this community to feel like he values how they feel, and how this community feels is that their current supervisor, they voted him out because they didn't feel well represented by him.
All right,
Let me
Nick,
ask you really,
last word,
do you
Nick.
think that people, what do you think the lasting impacts are going to be? Or is it going to be one of these things where it's in the moment, it's just mountain and it turns out to be a molehill and everybody just sort of accepts it? And oh, as you said, aren't these nice shops? And people just learn how to move around it, and then it's part of the landscape.
I think that's certainly probably, I think yes and yes. I think that's probably going to happen, but there is going to be lasting impact. Fewer people are going to go to Coast Village Road. Right now, you come to the hotel, there's a few stores. So people who want to shop on vacation go to Coast Village Road. If you're going to blow your wad on a $10,000 purse at Bottega Veneta or one of these really super fancy stores that most of the people who live here don't just wander into and buy stuff from on a day, like people like the tourists, which is what really offers hope to do better to the stores on Coast Village Road. If they're going to shop there, they're not necessarily going to go to Coast Village Road to shop.
All right,
There's going to be 10 restaurants. They're not necessarily going to eat on Coast Village Road. So
Right.
it kind of becomes this more self-contained thing.
all right.
Let me jump in with one last thing.
Real
John
quick, 'cause
Park.
we got to move on.
I know we do. I mean, 2 days before this vote, John Park was exceptionally frustrated at a planning commission meeting all about Sable Oil's project. And he was the lone dissenting voice on that vote, which was highly procedural and very limited, but it was the county's only bite at the apple. And he was saying we do not have enough information to make a decision, and I'm really frustrated by it. And staff said, "Well, it's too bad you have to vote." So I heard about this. I just thought, because I talked to him after that vote, and his frustration and exasperation was palpable. And it's tempting for me as an armchair psychologist, not knowing John Park really well enough to be one, to think he was taking it out on Montecito. What he was frustrated about was Sable.
All right.
How's that?
As his armchair psychologist, I have to ask you, Nick, the haircut, intentional or did he just not notice? Okay, here, let's move. We're real quick, Gwyn,
Jerry.
one more thing. Come on. One more, real quick, Montecito thing, Music Academy. There was a neighbor dispute. They're unhappy about the expansion of the number of life events, whatever that is, that the Academy's sponsoring, traffic and so on and so forth. But that kind of just went right through the board. Any fallout from that?
Well, I think, I think actually that was a really good conversation on the part of the supervisors. There are 41 what they call non-musical events, and of those 41 non-musical events, now 17 are allowed to be life events, which are weddings, funerals, those kinds of life celebrations, quinceañeras, bar mitzvah, whatever. With no outdoor amplified anything for life events, and for the other non-musical events, they're allowed outdoor speaking, but not music amplification. So, I thought that, Steve Lavanino made a really good point when he said, look, because the people who were appealing were saying they want to go back to what it was, the CUP of 2004. And Steve Lavanino said, that was 20 years ago. I hope in 2044, they're not saying, well, we don't need to look at this. It was looked at in 2024.
Oh, unless it's cannabis. Anyway, all right. Let's. Why? And that was the other weird thing. It was all like the North County supervisors were making that decision. I mean, the South Coast I mean, where was Laura on that?
She had to recuse herself.
Because,
I don't know.
all right. All right, let's talk election. Josh, I know you've had a lot of focus on the District 1 City Council race. Incumbent Alejandro Gutierrez has apparently lost. I guess they're still counting votes, but Wendy Santa Maria, the high energy rent control advocate, appears to have vanquished the incumbent. What was that all about?
Well, I mean, it was amazing to watch her candidacy from start to finish. And what I mean is the energy and the work ethic and the incitement that she had. It was nice to see a real grassroots sort of candidacy. You know, she announced at Ortega Park way back when, and then her big victory was on election night. And think about what she did. She was able to oust an incumbent who raised $20,000 more than her, who plastered the east side with a whole bunch of signs.
Many of them stolen.
And I don't like some of people in Alejandro Gutierrez's campaign have accused me of bias, which, by the way, as Nick knows, I've been accused of bias for 25 years. Somebody call up Ia Falcone. That doesn't, bother me at all. And I don't have a bias. But the one thing that I do recognize in my reporting is hard work. And Wendy Santa Maria worked really hard. She knocked on doors, and there's no substitute for doing that in a campaign. She had the tenants union people who were there, and they were working for her. And she herself walked the entire district. She registered new voters, and you can say what you want about who's local, who's not local. What it comes down to in these local elections is who is going to work the hardest. If you work hard and you got a little bit of money and you have a message, you're going to win. And Alejandro Gutierrez, she plastered the east side with signs, and she took a lot of money from the property owners, which is fine. That's the path that she took. But it is not a replacement, like I said, even with Angel Martinez several years ago, for doing the work of introducing yourself and making a connection. And so it appears as though she's going to win, and she had her big victory on election night, and we'll see what happens. As a practical matter, she's probably going to move pretty quickly to have some sort of 2% cap on rents.
To run for something else. Does the
You really should have her on the show, because I don't think she's the person you've built up in your head, but it's for you to decide.
I don't have any
Wait a
preconceptions
minute, Josh.
at all, except I didn't hear about anything except rent control. But be that as it may,
I mean, 2% cap, she has said it. She stayed on point. What's interesting to see is going to be whether Kristen Sneddon, council member,
how is that going to work with Prop 33 getting trounced 2-1 statewide? The rent control
wouldn't apply to anything after
gonna
it's
fit in
95.
or not?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it was Prop 33 with Prop 33 failing, rental properties that are 15 years old or less will be exempt. Prop 33 would have had them covered by rent control ordinances. So the newer properties will still remain exempt. It does send a mixed message.
Yeah, because who owns the older ones? It's the mom and pop room.
Well, they own some of the, in St. George. Is he a mom and pop? He owns old ones, he owns new ones.
I
mean, I think, what do we hear about the national elections? It's a reflection on, it's a referendum on the economy and people's economic pain. Okay, let's say that's true. I think that the fact that you have Oscar Gutierrez and Wendy Santa Maria, who are both very blunt, outspoken, direct proponents of rent control, speaks a lot. I think it's Wendy worked hard, but that was the song she banged, and people took criticism of her because that was the only thing they ever heard. In that district, which again, she's gonna have like 1,500 votes, so that's not a huge number, but it's more than anybody else.
Yeah, she's 100
rent
and,
control
152 ahead at the moment.
I mean,
Yeah.
I agree with Nick that the economy, but I'm looking at it from a purely political campaign perspective. Alejandro Gutierrez lost the Democratic Party. What does that mean? She lost field workers, canvassers. That is significant, and she downplayed that. You can't, I don't care what you think of the party leadership. If you're a Democrat, you want a group of people willing to knock on doors on your behalf. And if you don't have that, you are impacted. And so I think that that is the difference. You had the party for her, you had her tenants' rights people, and then you had a candidate herself who really no one's knocked on that many doors, forgive me, Jerry, since 2003, 2005, and Doss Williams. Um, no candidate has knocked on as many doors as Wendy Santa Maria has, and it makes a difference. Those personal, one-on-one interactions. And if Alana Gutierrez had worked hard, she probably would have won. Not to say she didn't work hard, but if she had knocked on every door in the district herself, it would have made a difference.
All right.
Well,
I think you
point.
probably infuriated her again enough. Let's move on to, I'm sorry, Nick, do you have something real quick?
No, go ahead.
All right. Measure I have to say, I was astonished there was no campaign for this sales tax increase. I thought it was not going to win. I misread the room, obviously, in terms of that. It won overwhelmingly, 2-1. Did that surprise you, Gwyn?
Yes, did. That
Yeah.
surprised me. I don't often see people voting for more taxes, and especially now. And I think that's, for some people, that's where Measure P came in as well into play.
Yeah.
So yeah, it did surprise me.
Maybe it's a good idea not to run a campaign when you're trying to raise taxes. I don't know. Nick, what'd you think? Were you surprised it was 2-1?
Well, there were a lot of tax measures on the ballot, and they all got more than 50%.
Yeah. Well, the Measure H did. That wasn't really a surprise, the hotel tax.
Measure H, there was a bunch of occupancy taxes, they all passed.
Oh, yeah.
Then you had a bunch of school bond measures, they all passed.
No, they didn't. Only 3 out of the 5 passed.
3 out of the 5, okay. They got more than
Of course,
50%, but they didn't get to 55.
The poorest districts where it didn't pass. But
And yeah, I was surprised too. I thought, okay, you're going into the buzzsaw of economics, don't tread on me, and you're asking for a half-cent sales tax. You would have thought there'd be more of a blowback, but it won, but 2-1. So
2-1, yeah. Josh, was there a secret City Hall celebration with everybody blowing the horn because now their pensions are safe with the passage of Measure I?
Yeah, no, I don't know anything. I don't hear anyone talking about that at all. People were all excited about the Library Plaza opening. That's this big city celebration of the week.
All right. And then Measure P, also a bit of a surprise. Santa Barbara Foundation poured in at least $440,000 into the campaign, which I guess is
now,
what
440. I haven't seen that number yet.
well, that's what I got the other night when I added it all up.
Okay.
Nick, what was your position on that?
I noticed you put
we were for it. We were knee-jerk supporters.
Well, you supported it,
my position was, it's going to cost you, for a typical homeowner, it's going to cost you the equivalent of 8 lattes a year more per 100,000 of your real estate valuation. So some kids have a decent classroom to go to at community college.
Well, yes, or some faculty member who's got,
Well, I know, but you and Ernie Solomon are saying it as the same
No, I mean, Dale makes an excellent point on this, which is and Josh, you can attest to this. I mean, there's not as many students.
There aren't as many students, but they
there's
need to
as many
improve the buildings.
classrooms and as many faculty people. I mean, they really need to get a handle on some kind of strategic plan out there.
You're right. It was not a measure twice once proposition. It was holy shit, Batman, we have to get this on the ballot because if we don't get it passed now, we're gonna lose 40
We're going to
million
lose the
bucks.
We're going
gym.
to lose the state. But I have to say, and I am such a believer in the role that city colleges play. They have amazing teachers like Josh Molina.
Oh God. Get
Hey,
a room.
Nick
And
Welsh,
I think
No
they
one
Welsh,
can.
makes
Nick
Josh
Welsh, you
great.
staff for my
You know
former
what makes
student,
Josh
so I
great
wouldn't
is
start.
guest lecturers. That's what makes Josh great.
And I think they don't get enough play. And listen, a lot of kids
You endorse it? Did
take
you
advantage.
endorse it?
I did not do an endorsement, and I'll tell you why. You know, I had a conversation with the president of the college. I had a conversation with one of the board members that was opposing it, who is the longest standing board member. And I kind of understood both sides. But the thing that bothered me about their campaign, and I said this to Andrew Jonas, is that her name? Erica Andrew Jonas. Anyway, when I had coffee with her, and I said this to Jordan Killebrew, who was on the campaign committee, that it bothered me that in none of their PR, in none of their talking points, including the first half hour of my talking to Dr. Andrew Jonas, and until you know, and then she talked about it when I asked her, they never mentioned the gym, which
Right.
a third of the funds were going to. And I thought that was really intentionally misleading. I didn't like it. I didn't like it. Didn't feel good to me.
Here's
So
what you call disingenuous. Yeah.
it felt disingenuous. It felt very, it felt too clever by half, you know, and every piece of literature I received in the mail too, never mentioned it.
You know, you see the first responders. Right.
No, it was a cookie cutter campaign run by this, bunch of political hacks up in Orinda. So, I mean, not a big surprise there, but be that as it may. All right, now the one thing also, Nick, to your point that everything that cost money passed, another surprise to me was Props 2 and 4, the big $10 billion apiece bond issues on the state ballot passed overwhelmingly, or appeared to. They're still, counting votes for another 6 weeks or so. But what did not pass was Proposition 5, which was, a little bit tricky, which was, changing the 2/3 vote to 55% for anything that had the word housing in it, like Rick Caruso's
I was struck by
shopping
that
mall.
too.
And voters figured it out, and they said no on that. They didn't want to change it. So that surprised me. And then the other thing that surprised, which Proposition 6, which would have taken involuntary servitude out of this out of the state constitution to match what a number of other states have done. People are in favor of voluntary servitude here in California, it appears. So I don't know. What'd you make of that?
Well, I was struck by both of them. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. We all want to have, state bond money for affordable housing, but if you try to, make it easier to pass them by reducing the number of votes you need, that didn't make it over the hump.
But the thing about it is the purpose of getting it to 55% is to put a further squeeze on people who are actually paying for all these bonds. Let's be blunt. Where 2/3 of the people are not. And yet you would think that the same vote that occurred for everybody else wanting free money would have occurred there, but it didn't. And I found it interesting and sort of a tribute to the voters kind of parsing what the intricacies of the matter were. And as well as I do, everything is now going to be a housing project, because you'll have one unit of housing or two. Oh, it's a housing project, just like Caruso's phony thing is not a housing project. Come on. It's It's a shopping mall. It's not a housing project, but they put that in there. And so Lisa Plowman, who by the way, I don't dislike. I know you told that to a friend of mine this week, but it's not true. It's just, pave everything over. We don't care whether there's water. We don't care whether there's garbage disposal. We don't care whether there's sewage. Build, build, build. Okay, that completes my rant.
Okay.
Any other? Oh, Prop 36. I may rant on that, Nick. You were saddened, I'm sure, by the defeat of Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon and
You know what?
Pamela Price up in Alameda County, and the apparent end of the let him out of jail free card reform movement with an overwhelming passage of Proposition 36.
I was not surprised. And, it's what happens when you move too far one direction or the other, you're going to generate your own backlash. And I think we have not seen a big increase in crime in the state of California, but what we have seen is a big increase in disorder. And if you look at issues of disorder and manifestations of disorder in public life, there's a lot of it, and people are done with it. We went through COVID. We went through, you have the buildup of all these large encampment cities. You have the springing up of all these sort of pop-up gangs who go into the malls and they, rip it off. I think those were so disquieting and have been played upon so well that people said, no, we need to ratchet things down. I kind of saw the
It was
involuntary
interesting.
servitude in the same breath. They say, no, this is too much criminal justice reform. No. And this one was a bit more emphatic. So the three-time offender shoplifters who are going for the big ticket items are going to be in jail more. So I wasn't surprised. I think, California, I think one of the things that hurt Kamala Harris was being from California. And we definitely have moved over very emphatically and aggressively towards the reform and not always surgically.
Yeah. All right. Just one quick point on that. Well, two really. One is, the Prop 36 thing was led by mayors, and they're on the ground floor of having to deal with all this stuff. So I credit them for standing up to the governor and all the big brains up in Sacramento who said, no, don't do this. And the second thing, there's a piece of Prop 36 that got almost no coverage, which if you read into it, I find interesting, and I'm just curious what you think about it. It creates a new category of crime called treatment mandated felony. And it's people who are on the streets who, have a drug possession or maybe a small dealing thing that they're busted. And if they won't go in to treatment for it, then they may end up in jail. And it just seems to me, and I realize that the progressive position is, homelessness is all about housing. Yeah, sure, but it's also about addiction. And it seems to me that this addressed that head on, that piece of homelessness. And did
We've seen a
did
couple
you
of
think
things.
that was a terrible thing?
We're going to find out. I mean, here's what I have been told time and time again by the mental health professionals and the drug treatment people, is that there is no evidence to support the effectiveness of mandated treatment. That as much as, God damn it, you better get your ass in there because what you're doing is.
But except
But it's better than sending them to jail.
It's better than sending them to jail.
Except
but
there has been a large increase in the number of homeless people in California since Prop 47 passed. Now, maybe it's not causality, maybe it's just coincidence, but I think some of the advocates of Prop 36 point to that as, maybe the dog that didn't bark or whatever that phrase is. All right.
We'll see how it goes and how much money is actually set aside. I mean, a couple of years ago, we just statewide, we passed a a measure kind of like that, saying that for all the people who are chronically on the streets and aren't able to take care of themselves, we are now going to basically say, we're going to take you in against your will and make you get treatment.
Yeah,
And
and we just spent $24 billion thanks to Gavin Newsom on homelessness, and that's working out real well too, even though he can't account for where the money went. All right, enough. My blood pressure's going up again, but now it's really going to go up. Let's talk about just to close out. I just would like to go around the horn and hear a comment from each of you about the outcome of Tuesday's election. I have to say I was not terribly surprised, but I was surprised that Trump apparently is going to win the popular vote. Gwyn, what's your takeaway about Tuesday?
All right, do we each have a minute? Because it's hard to.
How much time would you like?
I need like 90 seconds to 2 minutes. Here's what I would say.
All right, you're on the clock.
I think
I really enforce time limits.
I don't think there's one answer. I think this country, I think the Electoral College, I think money in politics, I think all this stuff obviously is a problem. But a key piece of every successful effort, every successful company, every successful organization is that they have a mission statement. And that mission statement keeps you on track and I think America lacks a mission statement. And, the one thing you could say about Americans is that, left, right, all the other, is that we're a really stubborn bunch. And for more than 2 decades, I would argue since 9/11, we're walking in the afterglow of an America that never existed. And I think that like the political parties have to begin to deal with the America, let's say the Democratic Party has to deal with the America that does exist. I think just to finish, haven't used my full 90 seconds.
Oh no,
I think
I'm
that
going to agree with you, but I won't.
I think we really need to decide what is our common vision for America. And I'm talking to all of us, including the Democratic Party that has long sort of prided itself on being this big tent party, because I know this is overstated, but we are a country of immigrants. Whether we like it or not, we are all immigrants, every single one of us at one point or another. And, I think we have this diverse, this rich diversity in this country, so we can fight it or we can reinvest in the idea of compromise and people, being able to have different opinions and being able to work together. And that's where we need to go from now. Why Kamala lost so much? I think there are a ton of reasons, which we all know, we've all heard. I don't think it's one thing. I don't think it's just sexism and racism, although I do think that's a part of it. But I think it's a lot of things. I think we had a Democratic candidate that a lot of people felt was shoved down their throats. I think, the president should have stepped aside sooner. I think people knew he should have stepped aside sooner.
Yeah. All right, Josh, you're no longer a young man. Your kids are getting older. But what'd you hear from Jacob up in Berkeley? And also, kind of what's your takeaway about this from a generational perspective?
Well, Jacob told me that Kamala Harris would never win, just because of all the things people are saying now. Not that he would, he would definitely not support Donald Trump, but just looking at her candidacy going up against an America that really likes Trump for some bizarre reason. We live in a silo in California. We're so lucky, and we sort of talk to ourselves. But if you look at those maps and the amount of red across the country, for some reason, those people identify with his message. I don't understand it, since he's offended everybody on the planet with his rhetoric and his comments. And I think the media has taken him far too seriously and given him far too much attention over the years. And now he's this person who has all of this power. But I will say that I did read Bernie Sanders' letter, and I think that there is some truth to what he's outlined with the Democratic Party as an institution.
Saying they turned their back on the working class.
On the working class. And I think that there are people in this country who are not bad people who may have voted for Trump because they felt as though they were let down by the Democratic Party. And I think as a country, we have to recognize that, like, we don't have to like Trump, but the people who do like Trump, we have to not demonize them and call them 150 names, because there may be one or two things that are really relevant to them that for whatever reason they identify with. I will say
It's
that
okay for them to call everybody else on the other side names. Let's go to
Well,
more
it's not,
dynamic.
it's not, I mean, it's like the whole way the Democratic Party went about it. It's like to convert someone to another position, you have to first know what they want. And you can't know what people want if you're not willing to listen to them. And I thought like a perfect example of that was like advising white women they could secretly vote for Kamala, which I think was so insulting to many of these women who aren't afraid of their husbands necessarily, but they really had an opinion. And I just think we need to move more.
Well, you saw a lot of women
Nick, what's your take?
Well, you saw a lot of women vote against abortion restrictions in their state, but also vote for Trump. I think that, there's a point.
A lot of white women.
A lot of white. Oh yeah, no, white women, absolutely. I mean, I think obviously the male gender gap in favor of Trump was a lot bigger than the female gender gap in favor of Harris. And I think they kind of, and it goes back, I think Bernie Sanders had it right that, the Democratic Party has been walking away from its working class roots for a very long time. And, when you have this huge, I don't know if it's, we've seen much worse inflation, but it was bad inflation. And what happens with inflation is prices go up and they don't go down once they stop going up. And wages aren't keeping track with it. And people are feeling the pain in real life ways. And you have a huge section of the country that is called flyover country, which is one of the most insulting terms you can come up with. And it's ironic and painful and telling that, one of the last politicians who really, of the Democratic Party, who had a genuine with the working class constituency was Joe Biden. But Joe Biden was a very old man and he should never have run. And the Democratic Party insiders should have said, dude, you can't, Grandpa, give me the keys to the car. It's painful. You can't drive.
All right, you're getting a little, you're on some touchy ground.
Can I add one thing term, because what the word we haven't used is the whole the woke thing that I think there's a big backlash to.
Very big.
And I just think you can't ask people who can't afford groceries to care first and foremost about trans rights or about electing a first woman, which obviously I think is important, but it's not what's first and foremost on most people's minds.
I think to follow up and then okay, I have a 33-year-old son and a 30-year-old daughter, and they're both working, and my son lives at home with me because he has a full-time job, but with the rents in Santa Barbara, he can't cut it. And they both have a very dark view of American politics and the essential corruption and illusion of it that is really at odds with mine and my wife. My son likes to say, we're only as free as they allow us to think we are. And, of course, we get into big arguments about it, but there's an essential worldview difference. And so they weren't supporting Trump, but they didn't really see much. Harris wasn't lighting them up.
Your kids were both supporting Trump?
No, I said they were not.
They were not.
They did not see Harris.
They didn't get too excited.
Meaningful difference. That the system is so inherently rigged. And I think that's why we have Trump as such a dominant figure. he emerges as the standard bearer for the Republican Party, which had been profoundly disillusioned by the war in Iraq and the economic meltdown of 2008, where the Republican establishment of George W. Bush really laid waste in really major ways to its base. And
Yeah.
so somebody like Trump comes along and says, here, I'm a Republican, but I'm a whole different flavor. And he taps into the anger and the hate. He was
Yeah. Oh, all right. My reaction was the great quote from John McCain, which is, "It's almost dark. It's always darkest before it turns pitch black."
great line.
Worst is yet to come. And I gotta say, just to push back, I am so sick of this unilateral thing of, oh, we have to really listen to these poor Trump people and what are their concerns about drinking coffee and diner. What about the other people? When are we going to start listening to them? It's just one side always has to surrender this.
Right. And
Other
that's what
side can insult everybody and pay no attention to what anybody else is concerned and completely give up on the idea of compromise and take over one of our political parties and turn into an authoritarian thing. I mean, come on. 1 of 8 every Americans lives in California. We too are Americans, and we ought to be able to have a say in it as well.
I agree, but
Especially when we're
We got
shoveling all of
54
our
electoral college votes.
to all of these red states that are sucking it
Yeah.
up in their Social Security and Medicare, and I get your government hands off my Medicare. I'm sorry, I'm just tired of it. I've had enough.
but you
And
want more
moving to
civility.
Norway.
Like
Thank you very much.
you think there could be more civility on both sides, though, right? I mean, I don't
Not
need
if
to be
I have
called.
anything to say about it.
Well, you obviously
No.
think you have stuff to say about other things.
No, I'm saying it is one side. One side has to uniformly disarm, and the other side's allowed to do whatever it wants.
Well, and I think both sides need to disarm.
And this
That's
both sides baloney is just it's over. Okay, it's like the
Here you are, Jerry. And
Democratic Party and Salud Carbajal specifically needs to wake the F up, and enough with the bipartisan. Oh, my bipartisan infrastructure. This is a war, Bal. And as they say on The Wire, when you in it, you in it. And if they don't start today and spend the next 726 days figuring out how to win back the House, we are all doomed.
You're right.
So that concludes my prepared remarks, my measured civil response to Gwyn's call.
no, but what you haven't commented on is that there is a big movement in this country towards a centrist party.
Where?
And
where is there?
I'm just telling you, read the paper. Every day there are articles about people who are
If I read your paper, I might think that. I don't think I don't see any evidence of that in the slightest.
Let's talk and have me on your show in 6 months. Let's calendar it.
All right.
I'm telling you, there is I think most people in America are sick of the fighting. They're sick of the bickering. They are sick of every minority party spending every waking moment trying to discredit the party in power and keep them from having any successes so that they can take power. And then it starts over again and nothing happens on behalf of us. And that's a big problem.
There you have it. Gwyn Lurie, unilateral disarmament. No, we'll talk about it. We'll see where 6 months.
I will say, go back to Nick's point about his kids. I'm around young students all the time, and this idea that the Democratic Party nationally is the savior of the country. I mean, they think both parties are corrupt. I mean, they think neither party.
I'm not saying they're the savior. I'm saying there are 2 political parties. One has been taken over by an authoritarian strongman. And if the other continues to pretend like this is 1988, they're going to get their clock clean time and time.
For sure. But you can't move away from corruption if there's so much money in politics. You can't. It's impossible.
All right. All right. Thank you all. Gwyn Lurie.
Yeah, we're gonna say, I think it was great though. You're going to see No Country for Old Men as a form of self-care. That was the best I've
I
heard.
rewatched it the other night.
It is so
I have to
grim.
say, I am so identified with Tommy Lee Jones's sheriff, who's just seen enough. I'm
You
sorry.
know, it was, it's a movie that hurts your soul. It's, uh,
All right,
How about
good.
Golden
Gosh.
Bachelorette? Don't want to talk about that?
Nick, thank you all so much.
all right.
Thank you all
We'll
for
see you.
watching. We're gonna take a couple weeks off. We'll be back at some point and see you again on Newsmakers. Take care.
All
everyone.
right.